Thank you very much, Santanu. Thank you very much to Kazi Nazrul University for having me here, and also to, I must say, to the Asansol Heritage Research Group, who've been fantastic. We've had an extremely intense week here, looking at all sorts of different heritage over the past week. What I'm going to do just now is reflect on that and reflect a little bit on some of the things that the other speakers have just said. I think Devodicha's kind of provocation at the beginning was really interesting, like, whose heritage is it and who has the right to call it their heritage? Because of all the people in the room that would have the most questionable right to call any of this heritage my heritage, it would be me. What am I doing here investigating heritage in a place like Asansol? To what extent could I possibly claim that any of this is mine, or has anything to do with me, or indeed that I might have any right to talk about it? I want to start with an image here. This isn't anywhere in the Asansol district, though it looks quite similar to quite a few places that we've seen. This is Rome, engraved in the middle of the 18th century. It was the sort of print that was made for British travellers to Rome to buy and take home as souvenirs. It was particularly resonant to them at that time in the late 18th century because the Britons of the late 18th century imagined that they were the new Romans. And the reason they went to this city was to learn how to run a global empire and to look at what was left after one had gone. If we could get the next slide, please. Of course, that has gone. You mentioned Kenyon Wright. I live in Scotland. We are about to become the next colony to leave the British Empire in the next 2 years. If you read the news, it could well happen. And certainly within the Western Academy and beyond, there's been a huge amount of thinking over the past few decades about how to reframe ourselves and our sense of our heritage in the light of the fact that the Western empires, the European empires, no longer exist. Here are 3 very well-known publications about this: Edward Said's Orientalism, David Cannadine's Ornamentalism, a fascinating book, and of course more recently Shashi Tharoor's Inglorious Empire. But I'd just like you to look at the subtitles of these books. What's it called? What's Orientalism called? Western Conceptions of the Orient. What's Ornamentalism called? How the British saw their empire. What's Shashi Tharoor's called? What the British did to India. This is all about the West doing things or looking at the East. But, if we could have the next slide please, what happens if the East looks back? What happens if actually you come and study us? And what I want to do now is take you through 4 very short stories about what happens, or what can happen, when the East looks back. You are not here as objects of study, you are here to study people like me. That is why I am here. I am the object of your study. If we have the next slide please. So, first one, what did we look like in the end? What did we, the British, as we left, look like to you? Here's a statue, it's of King George V, the King Emperor. This statue was made to stand in Rajpath at the other end of the long axis through New Delhi, opposite the Rashtrapati Bhavan. This is where it stands now, many, many miles out of the centre of Delhi, in a kind of rather depressing, unkempt park called Coronation Park. And in the middle of that park, you might imagine what happened basically is in the 1960s, surprisingly late, all of these statues were removed from the centre of New Delhi. All the statues of the arrogant viceroys, the Lord Curzons, and all these things were taken away and put on the edge of the city so that you didn't have to look at them. So that you could replace them with statues of your own leaders of your own time. But they were taken to this place with a particular irony, because this place as the inscription says here, is here on the 12th day of December 1911, His Imperial Majesty King George V, Emperor of India, accompanied by the Queen Empress in solemn durbar, announced in person to the governors, the princes and the peoples of India his coronation, celebrated in England on the 22nd day of June 1911, and received from them their dutiful homage and allegiance. What I couldn't resist doing was hanging around with the boys who were kicking their football and playing cricket in the park, trying to talk to the lovers sitting under their umbrellas in the benches hidden behind the statues, to try to find out what they think all of this is about. What would those boys be able to tell you about the contents of that park? Question number one. Next story. What did we look like in the beginning, before it all happened? Next slide. Here is a room in Rajasthan. It's in a place called Ganaral, in between Marwar and Mewar, and no room could correspond more beautifully to a Western conception of the Oriental and the exotic. And what we can see along the bottom, actually this will be quite interesting for you, because there's actually images of Jaipur. There's the Hawa Mahal at the bottom. What it seems to be representing is a grand and solemn durbar in which the kings of Rajputana are paying homage and dutiful allegiance to one another. But zoom in closer to the image, and what do we see? This, first of all, plate glass. Where does plate glass come from? Liverpool, probably Asansol. Who's behind the plate glass? Redcoats, the soldiers of the East India Company. And all through this Oriental Jaipur are these figures with their white faces and their large black moustaches. And in a carriage is this man who I've convinced myself, I'm seeking proof for it, is James Todd, the author of the Annals and the Antiquities of Rajasthan. Why do I think so? Because we can date the room almost exactly to 1818, when he organised all the signings of the treaties of the Rajas of Rajputana to this room. So here is the West seen from the point of view of a local painter in a small takarat in Marwar. Third story, what did you do to us? It all seems to be about what we did to you. What did you do to us? What's happened to Britain because of you? First of all, there is an entire architectural heritage which exists in our country because of you. On the left-hand side, here is the palace of the Prince Regent in Brighton. This was built at exactly the same time that James Todd was organising those treaties in Rajputana. On the right, 200 years later, is the Hindu temple in Neasden, constructed about 10 years ago by an entirely different form of connection between South Asia and Britain, which is the huge numbers of people who now live in Britain. Oh, that's kind of funny. But yeah, what does our head of state wear on her head? A crown. What's in the middle of the crown? A jewel that belonged to the King of Punjab and all the people from before him. Let's not forget that the reason that we were here was to take all your beautiful things from you and take them back to Britain, which is where they are. If you want to see the most beautiful artefacts of Indian art and culture, come to London, come to the V&A, and you will find them there. Thirdly, we talked about documents and knowledge, and this is something that has come up again and again in the discussions about heritage, about records. Where's the best place to find the records of what went on here? The British Library in London. This is a page of a minute book from the India House records from the East India Company. This is from just after the first uprising, so kind of late 1857. I want to read it to you twice. It's about 3 officers who've been placed on trial for atrocities at Kanpur. Firstly, it says, in concurring with the opinion of the Commander-in-Chief, never again to confide any military commands to any one of these officers, we therefore ask you on receipt of this dispatch to transfer them. That's version 1. What you can see is what happens when the communication gets to London. It's redacted. We concur with the Commander-in-Chief in thinking it will never again be advisable to confide any military command to this officer, who will therefore be transferred. So two of them got let off by a decision in London for something that happened in India. So don't believe that when you get to London you will find the truth sitting there. It's been redacted because the records that were made of this country, and I think this is part of the problem of trying to find out about the history of this country, the records of this country weren't made to benefit yourselves. They were made to rule the country from a great distance and to manage resources backwards and forwards. And so when we talk about knowledge and documentation, and in particular, we started with a conversation about the necessity of documentation to prove our citizenship in this country, or whatever it might be. Actually, here we are. Here's the origin of this particular thing. So let's not forget, that's in a sense, the discussion of heritage in itself, the understanding of heritage in itself, is, to some extent, a piece of colonial heritage. The idea that there is such a thing is in itself a kind of imperial invention of sorts. To which I want to come to my final story, which is here, living with colonial heritage. I've shown you what happens in the great capital, in Georgiabad and Maripur. I've shown you what happens in exotic Rajasthan. I've shown you what happens in London. What happens here, which is neither the capital of a great nation, an exotic other, or indeed the colonial motherland. But this is a place where people live with colonial heritage. And what's been really fascinating to me, in particular, is to see around a variety of places in here and understand and encounter how people live with heritage. This is not a museum. This is not a museum. It's not a tourist attraction. It's somebody's home. Okay, it's somebody's home. And you can see that it is it's several rooms of what was once a very grand bungalow. Have the next slide, please. Even grander bungalow. Here is the bungalow of Dwarkanath Tagore that Hermonto and Subhajit were talking about. This is a place in which people live. This is a road between two villages that also happens to go through an open cast mine that is on fire, pumping the toxic gases that are making us all cough right now. And in the middle of it is this ruined house, third image. Here's a particularly wonderful one we saw yesterday in Kulti, one of the managerial bungalows at Kulti that is now occupied by, the occupants told us, 30 families. It was designed for one. Now it might look to you like all of these are problems, that all of these are disasters, that they're all terrible. But I want to go back through them. Let us imagine that we sit down and ask the people who live here in this place how they look after it. Let's imagine why they put some black plastic sheeting there in order to protect their kitchen from the rain. Let's see just to the right, which you can just image the vegetable gardens that they built next to the building to grow their food so that they can live there. They are caring for this place. Now they might not be caring for it like the Archaeological Survey of India would be caring for it, but they are caring for this place. If we could go back again. Back in. Here, this might look like a disaster, but actually it's an extraordinary achievement. The Narayankuri Heritage Society have negotiated with the mine not to bury the remains of Dwarkanath Tagore's house. And that might seem like a disaster. It's not a disaster, it's an extraordinary achievement of care that such a thing still exists. Go back again. Yeah. And here is a house that somebody is looking after. I found particularly moving, in a sense, the way that the mantelpiece, the old fireplace, becomes converted into a domestic shrine. These are not places that nobody cares about. They're not places that nobody cares about, and they're not places that nobody knows about. They are places that people do care about, and that we do know about. And if you seek a record in this country, perhaps the people who are doing that could be extraordinarily informative. It was fascinating to hear about you talking about the people living next to the wall in Jaipur. And actually, here is a way that people are living with the past. They're not going on holiday to look at it and take a snap. They're living with it and in it all of the time. Now, they don't have very much money. They have to use black plastic sheeting. They haven't got the best technology, but they are doing their best to maintain and love what they have. So if we can now go forward 3, sorry. So I just want to finish by returning to this slide, because here is ancient Rome in the 18th century. It doesn't look like this anymore. What happened is the Archaeological Survey of Italy got to it, and it's now a somewhat dry, touristified museum. But what looks like the ruins of an empire is the birth of another civilization, is the place where another civilization is conducted. And so to return to that initial question about who has the right to call this their heritage, I would posit the converse question, which is who doesn't have the right to call it their heritage? Who is there to say that something either is or is not heritage, and indeed to judge or demarcate who should be allowed to access it? I came to a very, very depressing symposium here about 3 years ago, long before I met these people, which was for collaborations between research organisations in the UK and the ICHR. And what we were continually told is the greatest problem of this country is encroachment. We're told the greatest problem of this country is encroachment. But actually, where are you going to put those people? What are you going to do for them then? You can't just put a fence around them. You can't just put a label saying the Archaeological Survey of India own this place, go away. Heritage needs to be lived in and lived with. It is not about placing things in a museum, but actually making a place for the future. And in a sense, when we're talking about the future of heritage, it has to be something with which and in which we actually live. So I'll finish there. Thank you.